We're looking at a frequency table. We have our random variable off to the left. It's a discrete random variable, 0, 1, 2, 3, and so on. We've got the frequency with which we observed each random variable, right? There were 52 weeks in the year, and we made 52 weekly observations, and this was the breakdown of those 52 weekly observations. We've already learned how to do a relative frequency, and you know there's one column left. It's the cumulative relative frequency. So let's get going on that. We're going to talk about mechanically how do we do this, how do we interpret it, and maybe what's special about working with a quantitative, a random variable as opposed to a categorical variable as we've seen in the past. So let's get going. Cumulative relative frequency. I'm going to center this. In fact, I'm going to center out the whole column. Remember, cumulative relative frequency says by the time we've gotten to this row, how much of all of the observations have we observed? So by the time we get to row 1, well, pretty much all we've seen is row 1. And so we're just going to say equals and whatever value is directly to the left. Where things get interesting, as they have in the past, is once you get to row 2. Well, if you want to ask how much of all of the data have I seen by the time I'm at row 2, what you have to do is you have to say the old stuff plus the new stuff. Well, the old stuff is up here. That's what I've seen so far. And then the new stuff is the stuff that I'm seeing in row 2. So it's going to be E4, the value above, plus D5, the value to the left. And we'll do it the long way one more time. Remember, cumulative relative frequency is asking at any given row, how much of all the data have you seen so far? So now that we're in row 3, we are going to say, well, all the old stuff, all the stuff that we've already seen in rows 1 and 2 lives up here. And then we are going to add the new stuff from row 3. So 1 up and 1 to the left. And so by the time we've gotten to row 3, we've seen 35% of all the data. I can just grab and drag this circle in the bottom right hand of the row and drag it all the way down to the bottom. And as we've discussed in the past, you absolutely want the last row to have a cumulative relative frequency value of 100% because, hey, by the time you've gotten to the bottom row, you've seen all 100% of the data. So again, we'll just kind of center this out. A couple little housekeeping things. I like to show you this along the way. We are going to create a border. It's going to be a bottom border. And let's re-merge and center. We already merged and centered before, but now the title covers the entire table. And we'll bold this cumulative relative frequency. Again, the interpretation is really nothing new. It just says in any given row of our frequency table, how much of all of the observations or all of the data have we seen so far. We've already seen all this stuff with categorical variables, and we can imagine that instead of a random variable, we had events, right? The event was saw yellow, saw blue, saw pink, saw green, and that's great. And we can do some pretty cool stuff with that, even with cumulative relative frequency. The problem is that there's no ordering to pink and yellow and blue and green in some sort of universally objective sense. And so by the time you get to, say, row 4 and you're looking at the cumulative frequency, it's like, okay, well, yellow plus blue plus green, etc., plus pink all comes out to 62%. But now that we're dealing with a quantitative variable in our frequency table, this is starting to make a lot more sense. We're saying that based on all the data that we have seen, 62% of the observations were 3 or less. 79% of all the observations were 4 or less. 88% of all the observations were 5 or less. And this is, as it turns out, going to be immensely helpful to us. And it's a feature that really only exists when you're dealing with a quantitative variable as opposed to a categorical variable, as we've seen in the past.